friends, it's Miss Melissa here with Trailblazers Week 3. This week we're going to be talking about presidents because there's a special holiday called President's Day happening. President's Day is when we celebrate all of the presidents that have led the United States. The president has many different jobs. One of his important jobs is that he's the leader of the military. The military is the people who fight wars and battles for us. So like the military, the Navy, which is the people who drive our warships, the Air Force, which is the people that drive our fighter jets. The president is the leader of all of those different branches of the military. So he has a really important job. He has other jobs too. And we'll actually read about some of those jobs that the president has. You may have heard of different presidents that we celebrate on President's Day, like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. Our current president is Joe Biden. We had Donald Trump. We had Barack Obama, George W. Bush, all those different guys. They're all presidents of the United States, and we celebrate them all on President's Day. In fact, you may actually be out of school to celebrate President's Day this week. You may have a day off from school for that, which is awesome. So I have a couple of stories I'd like to read to you about presidents, and then we'll talk about our craft that we have this week. Our first story that I have is called P is for Presidents. And this story was written by Wendy Cheyette Lewison. So she's the author of the story. The author writes the words. And it says, illustrated by Valerio Fabretti. Remember, the illustrator is the person who draws the pictures of the story. So we have our front cover of the book, our back cover of the book. And did you know this thing here down the side of the book has a special name? It's called the spine. And the spine of the book has an important job. The spine is what holds all of our pages together. If the book didn't have a spine, it would just be a pile of papers on the floor. So the spine is important to the book. So it says P is for president, the president of the United States of America. Who is the president? Well, the president is the leader of our country. He can come from any kind of family. He can be any color and any religion. He also can be a she, but there are some rules. He must be at least 35 years old, and he or she must be born an American citizen. So they have to be born here in the United States. The president can also do any kind of work. Many of our presidents have been lawyers or teachers. Many have served in the military as soldiers. Some were farmers, one was an engineer, one was an inventor, and one was even an actor. And the one who was the actor, that was Ronald Reagan. And he used to act in movies before he became president. Well, what does the president do? The president has a hard job. He works to fix problems in America. He works to make sure you stay healthy and get a good education. He works to make peace in the world, and he does a lot of listening. He shakes a lot of hands. He has so much to do that he works day and night. A person must have a lot of energy to be president of the United States. But the president doesn't work alone. He works with other people. The president tells them his ideas and listens to theirs. Then he tries to work things out with them. He is our leader, but he is not the boss of everyone. How does someone get to be the president? Well, he has to work hard to learn about our country. He studies American history and what is happening in America today. When he decides to run for president, we call him a candidate. The candidate goes all around the country and he talks to people. We call this a campaign. During the campaign, he tries to show people that he is the right candidate for the job, the most important job in America. When the campaign is over, people must decide who they think will do the best job, this candidate or that one. All across America, over 100 million people go to the polls to vote, so they can help choose. When you are 18 years old, you will be able to help pick the next president too. And there's all the people going to the polls. And right here is a sign, it says V-O-T-E. Vote. The winner of the election becomes our president for the next 4 years. He moves into the White House in Washington, D.C., and the old president moves out. The White House is a big White House where all of our presidents, well, all of them but George Washington, have lived. The new president's whole family lives in the White House with him, and we call the president's family the first family. And the president's wife is the first lady. Many presidential pets have lived in the White House too. Dogs, cats, snakes, turkeys, that's odd, goats, bears, and lizards. One president even had a pet alligator. That's a little creepy. Look at all of those presidential pets. I like the turkey on the president's desk. You see it there? Oh, and that goat, he's eating a chair. He's eating a chair. That's crazy. The White House is a big and busy place. There are 132 rooms and 32 bathrooms. Many people work there. Chefs cook meals. Housekeepers clean. There are personal assistants and government officials too. The president doesn't get much privacy. The president doesn't stay in the White House all the time, though. He travels a lot. He meets with people all over America and all around the world, too. He even has his own limousine, his own helicopter, and his own airplane. And they call his airplane Air Force One. And the vice president, who is the second in command, they call the vice president's airplane Air Force Two. But everywhere he goes, Secret Service agents are with him. They are there to protect him and keep him safe so he can do the job given to him by the American people. You can see the Secret Service agents here in the black suits. They always wear black suits, and if you look in their ears, see that little curly thing there in the ear? That's an earpiece. They wear those so that they can actually talk to each other. It's kind of like a walkie-talkie, but smaller. And the Secret Service agents can talk to each other and hear each other through those earpieces. They can tell information to each other, things that will help them keep the president safe. We have had many presidents since America became a nation hundreds of years ago. Some presidents have done such a good job for America that we want to remember them all the time. So we have named cities and streets after them. We have even put their faces on our money. And you can see this boy here, he's got money there with a president on it. And I think he's gonna buy some candy with that money. I wonder which candy he's gonna buy. Maybe he'll buy them all. We have built beautiful monuments to celebrate our presidents, and maybe someday you will visit them, or maybe you already have. Here's one monument. This is the Lincoln Memorial, and that's Abe Lincoln, a statue of Abe Lincoln sitting in that chair. That's in Washington, D.C., which is our capital. That's where the president lives. And maybe someday, the president will be you. This is called Mount Rushmore. This is a big rocky mountain out west, and somebody carved the faces of different presidents into Mount Rushmore. And I find it interesting because this one here, that picture, that face looks like that boy that was buying all that candy, doesn't it? I think they're thinking maybe that boy will become president someday. That's the end of our story, friends. I hope you enjoyed P is for President. I have one more story that I would like to share with you. This story is about a certain president. This president's name was George Washington. Did you know that George Washington was the first president of the United States that there ever was? George Washington was the very first one. And he had an interesting history. George Washington, before he became president, actually worked in the military. He was a general. Remember in the P is for President book, it said that presidents can have many different kinds of jobs. Some are lawyers, some are teachers, one was an actor. Well, George Washington was a general in the military. So the story I want to read to you right now is George Washington, farmer, soldier, and president. So he was a soldier, but he was also a farmer from that title. This story is by Pamela Hill Nettleton. So she's the author, and then it was illustrated by Jeff Yesh. So Jeff made all the pictures. George Washington became the first president of a new country, the United States of America. He is best known for this role, but George Washington did many jobs well. He owned a big, successful farm. He was a great soldier, and before he was president, he was the commander-in-chief of the First American Army. Many years later, people still honor George Washington as a great leader. This is his story. You can see him here. He has white hair. The world was very different when George Washington was born than it is today. America wasn't even a country back then. It was made up of 13 colonies that belonged to England. Virginia was one of those colonies. George was born in Virginia in 1732. His father was a farmer. No one guessed that George would become one of the most famous people in history. There's baby George and his parents. And there's the house that he was born in. When George was 11, his father died. George's older half-brother, Lawrence, was like a father to him after that. George went to school until he was 14 or 15. He was very smart, and he kept on learning new things. When he was 16, George became a surveyor, mapping land in the Virginia wilderness. Many people tell the tale of George chopping down his father's cherry tree and admitting that he did it. This actually didn't happen. Someone made up the story to show how honest George was. So maybe you've heard that cherry tree story about George Washington before. I know I've heard it. And if you've heard it, it was actually a made up story. Didn't really happen. There's George as a surveyor. Surveyors tell you where the boundaries of different lands are. When George was in his 20s, he fought in the French and Indian War. He led English soldiers and colonists against the French to win land. George learned how to fight. He also learned how to work with people. He was a good leader, and the army promoted him. Promoted means that they made him go up into a higher position. One of George's favorite horses was named Blueskin, and one of his dogs was named Sweet Lips. Sounds like George had an interesting way of naming his pets. Blueskin and Sweet Lips. After the war, George went home to his big farm called Mount Vernon. He married Martha Custis and became a stepfather to her 2 children. George and the colonists bought many things from England that they couldn't get in America. The King of England made them pay taxes on things like tea and stamps. By the time he was 41, George owned about 45,000 acres of land. He raised tobacco, wheat, oat, peaches, and apples. The colonists were angry and asked the king to stop the taxes. He said no. George and the colonists decided to fight back. The king sent soldiers to fight the colonists. The colonists asked George to lead the new American army against the English. This was the Revolutionary War, and it's how America became its own country. One thing the colonists did to fight back was to dump a shipload of tea into the Boston Harbor. This was called the Boston Tea Party. It was hard to fight the war. George and his soldiers were tired and cold. They often ran out of supplies. George gave some of his own money to help the soldiers. They lost many battles, but George never gave up. General Washington taught his soldiers to follow the rules. They could not have won the war without George Washington's leadership. Finally, the colonists won the war. Some of the soldiers asked George to be their king, but George didn't want to be a king. He did not even want to be president, but the new country needed a leader. The people thought George was a hero, but he did not brag about himself, and this made the people like George even more. And this was George Washington crossing the Delaware River, which was one of the most amazing things he did when he was a general. See how there's ice in the river? It was cold and icy, and it was probably really hard for that boat to cross the river. George helped put together the new government. The colonies became states. The people elected George the first president of the United States. It was not easy being the president of a new country. The states didn't know how to work together with each other. But George led the states well, and he made the country stronger. George helped make the rules that other presidents after him would follow. He was president for 8 years. Then George went home to take care of his farm. He died 2 years later. George Washington is remembered for being brave and wise. He is called the father of his country. He's the one that started it all. The Washington Monument was built in Washington, D.C. to honor George. It was completed in 1884 and rises 550 feet into the air. This is about as high as a 55-story building. And there's the Washington Monument. And that's the end of our story. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed hearing about George Washington in this book. Since we've been talking about George Washington, I thought it would be neat for us to do a craft that looks like George Washington. So if you have your activity kit available there, you should have all the supplies to make this picture of George Washington. The instructions are on the outside. So just follow the instructions and you'll end up with something that looks like this. Doesn't this look like George Washington? With his blue uniform and his white hair. He's the father of the United States. We wouldn't be who we are without George Washington. That's why we celebrate President's Day, because there's great leaders that helped make America what it is. Well, boys and girls, I hope that you enjoyed our stories today. It's time for Miss Melissa to go. I will see you guys next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about snow and blizzards. Have a great week. And if you have a day off from school for President's Day, I hope you enjoy it. Have a great week. See you next time.